Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping things that we need to do. You can type questions into the Q&A box at any time, but please understand that we probably won't have time to answer them all. Any that aren't answered we'll use to inform future events. The hashtag for the event is Trauma Prostitution. If you're going to be tweeting about the event, please use this hashtag, Trauma Prostitution. We are thrilled that this event is being subtitled in Spanish. How you turn these on depends on what platform you're using, web, Windows, or Android or Apple app. In the Zoom controls, there will be a closed caption or CC option. Click or tap this to turn the subtitles on or off. We have three brilliant speakers with us today. But before I introduce them, I'm going to quickly explain what the Nordic model is, which is the model we are campaigning for. We will hear very graphically and powerfully today about the profound harms that prostitution causes to the individuals directly involved. The Nordic model aims to reduce the size of the prostitution system and to reduce the number of women and girls being drawn into it, while providing those caught up in it with a viable transition out. The Nordic model has three key elements. Firstly, it decriminalizes those who are prostituted. Secondly, it provides services for those involved in prostitution to give support and help to leave the industry and rebuild a life outside. And thirdly, prostitution buy-in becomes a criminal offence with a key aim of changing men's behaviour. Along with all this, there need to be strong laws against pimping and human trafficking, a public information campaign, education in schools and colleges, training for the police, judiciary, CPS and other frontline staff, investment in real alternatives for women, and measures to address poverty and inequality. So that is what we're campaigning for, a human rights-based approach to prostitution legislation and policy. Our first speaker, therefore, is ÅSBOGÅRD. Merle is a Swedish survivor of prostitution and a campaigner for women's rights under the Nordic model in Sweden.
I came into prostitution when I was 14 years old. I came into prostitution, I used to say, because of events happening earlier that year when I suffered my first rape. And a person close to me, who I thought was my friend, who was older than me, picked up on this, picked up on my struggle, trying to survive. And with mental health issues and trying to fit in school and so on, and so she started pimping me. She told me I had a debt to her that needed to be paid, or else my life would be hell. So for 16 years, I remained in prostitution during numerous of pimps. Finally, the last years, I kept pimping myself out because I had the need of money. I was a mom and I needed to fund my school. So that was it. And I tried for a very long time not to see that I had suffered these mental issues because of prostitution. I blamed it on being maybe adopted. I was adopted, I am adopted, but also being bullied in school. But as a grown up now, I can see that all of them, when it comes to trauma, the complex PTSD that I had now recently been diagnosed with comes from the life in prostitution. Today I'm a political scientist, I'm a lecturer, I'm a soon to be published writer. I have come through because I have a network of people around me, but not all of us are that lucky. But I'm born in Colombia. So I was born in Cali, Colombia, in the suburb there. I came to Sweden in 1986. And well, also being Black in a predominantly white society, how that affected me being prostituted, how racism affected that. This is all the issues I'm now diving into, trying to see if we can get to the bottom of it. But yes, I've been a prostitute in Sweden almost as long as the law has been in place, and it's done great things. It has, but we have to have a progressive law. With a progressive community, we need progressive laws. And also after Me Too, I would say we have watched a revival of the law, which also activated the other part that was falling behind. So now we're working to get more and more nationwide spread support for women in prostitution, having trauma treatment being more available nationwide, and just having a greater understanding that just because we're talking about PTSD doesn't mean you have to suffer through wars. PTSD can come and be an issue for you for a number of reasons. So we're now actually using the law more efficiently than I feel that we did in the past. Or that we can also find records that we haven't really used it as efficiently when it comes to providing services for women, but we are getting there. So I'm very, very, very happy to be able to come here today and talk to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Merle. That was a very interesting discussion that we just had, and thank you for telling us about your own story, and for me particularly how race impacted on your experience. Something obviously that is not usually sort of brought up in women's experiences of prostitution as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. So our next speaker then is Rebecca Malt. Rebecca used to do indoor prostitution of various types, all of which allowed punters to be violent. She's now an abolitionist and writes to explain the conditions of prostitution and the impact of having trauma as an exited woman. So thank you, Rebecca.
Afternoon, everyone. I just thought I'd start with a poem that I wrote a few years ago called Don't Ask. Don't ask, please don't ask. About then, you wouldn't want to know how I ran from school, running to men squeezing my head with words that fitted into their beds, to be screwed everywhere, to vagina, to waiting, for my mother to say, "You okay?" Please don't ask about then, you wouldn't want to know how I chose penises ramming into my heart, making me forget home where my stepfather gently places his hand inside, reaching for that heart. Please don't ask about then, you wouldn't want to know how I placed knives in lines, collecting pills, only to bounce my head from walls to stop thinking. So please don't ask, because I can't tell, because I can't see anyway. That is kind of a description of trauma, in a way. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting, and the focus of this meeting is about what trauma means to prostituted women, in particular to exited women. I will speak to some of my experiences while showing the connection to the prostituted as a class. First, we must see that every punter and every sex trade profiteer will never see the prostituted as a full human being. Instead, they make the prostituted into subhuman sexual goods to be consumed and thrown away. This is fundamental to the forming of trauma inside the prostituted. It is a gradual or a sudden stripping of the prostituted woman's humanity. Therefore, she has no access to basic human rights, such as the right to be safe, the right to have a voice, and the right for a dignified life. Part of the stripping away of the prostitute's humanity includes claiming that the prostitute does not feel or know fear or pain. This gives the punter permission to be as sadistic as they desire, with no consequences. So the prostituted will be tortured, she will be raped on a regular basis, and she will be placed in a position where she may be murdered at any time and in any place. This is the building blocks of trauma. Trauma is formed inside the prostituted by forces outside the sex trade. Many maybe the majority of prostituted women come from backgrounds of childhood abuse. This can be mental, physical, or sexual abuse. This helps build a child and turning into an adult full of self-hate, often detached from her body, and with a sense that she will not live long. This is ideal fodder for the sex trade profiteers. The sex trade is founded on a racist system. Why else do so many Black, Asian, and Indigenous women inside every aspect of the inside every aspect of the sex trade? Why else do punters perform the most sadist and often pay the sadist practices on these women and often pay the less? Why else do many of the murders of prostituted women be on Black, Asian, and Indigenous women? We live in multiple cultures that build up the trauma inside the prostituted women. This is not new, and this does not come from one particular culture. To truly understand the depths of our trauma, we must look at history and connect with other countries and other cultures. Most of the trauma is formed because prostituted women, especially exited women, are not allowed to grieve, to have deep fury, or to seek justice. This comes from our individual journeys, but also from being connected to the prostituted of all times, all countries, all ages, and all backgrounds. My pain and grief is connected to a Roman slave in a brothel. My pain and grief is connected to prostituted in India or Australia. There is no time when prostitution was made acceptable. And every culture that is invaded by the sex trade destroys the humanity of the prostituted. The silent screaming of our trauma comes from every continent, every part of human history. There can be no safe place for the prostituted when men are entitled to create a class that they name as the prostituted, whose only role is to be raped and tortured. I am close to finishing. I will say that trauma is not the simple binary of being healed or not. It is more like learning to live or dance with trauma as a shadow in our lives. For many exited women, trauma is lifelong. This is not negative, for it shows our deep strength, determination, and courage. Despite living with trauma, we are campaigners to abolish the sex trade. But more importantly, we are building full lives. Our dance with trauma allows it to flow in our minds and bodies. Exited women are made to be resilient, truth sayers, and to have a backbone of steel. To end, I will say that every exited woman I know are the bravest people I've ever met.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was very interesting to hear you pick up on the themes of race as Merle described in her own experience. I know Rebecca feels very strongly about how prostituted women aren't seen as human and how they don't have the same rights as others. So again, I know that's usually a really strong theme that Rebecca brings through in her writing. I've read quite a lot of Rebecca's writing, and it's really interesting to see how she can say so much about her experiences of being in prostitution through that writing. So I would recommend anybody to have a look on the internet and see if they can find some of those works that she's done. So our third and final speaker then, before we go on to our discussion, is Dr. Ingerborg Krauss. Dr. Krauss is a clinical psychologist and expert in psychotraumatology. For 7 years from 1995, she undertook humanitarian work in Bosnia and Kosovo, working particularly with female victims of sexual violence. After that, she worked for 9 years as a psychologist and also as a therapeutic leader in psychosomatic and addiction clinics in Germany. And since 2012, she has directed a psychotherapeutic counseling center in Germany where she's treated many victims of prostitution. She's a passionate speaker and activist for the abolition of prostitution in Germany and has worked extensively with the German political system to advocate for an end for the legalized prostitution system there. In 2014, she extended her advocacy work to medical professions and established a network of scientists and medical experts united in efforts to research, publish, and educate the harsh realities of prostitution and its impact on individuals and society. This network now has over 200 members and is unique in the world. So welcome, Dr. Krauss.
Oh, thank you very much for organizing this, especially, and thank you also to Merle and Rebecca to have accepted this invitation. I will start immediately with sharing my presentation. And I want to apologize for my English. I have written it down and I will read some, my text. So we need to understand the close connection between prostitution and trafficking, and trauma as a precondition to enter into prostitution and as a result of prostitution. We need to understand in both cases the psychological mechanism that brings women into prostitution even they don't want to, and the mechanism that holds women in prostitution even they want to leave. Doesn't work. Helmut Sporer, a policeman who has worked over 25 years in the anti-trafficking resort in Germany, says that at a low rate, we have a minimum of 100,000 people who are victims of human trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. 500 times more than recognized by the police, because in 2019, we had only 287 legal proceedings for the purpose of sexual exploitation who have been registered. Of course, with a law that legalizes prostitution, the demand has exploded. But in a climate where prostitution can be practiced as a job as any other, the institutions, like the justice, the police, the counseling officers, have developed so good as no qualification to understand the mechanism of trafficking and forced prostitution and what prostitution does to a woman. The police goes into the brothels to make their usual control and ask the women if everything is okay. They say yes, and this was it. Even if almost all of those women who said yes are trafficked. The police became blind towards the mechanism of trafficking. They have a wrong picture of how a victim looks like. They think they have to look for metal chains, a woman running towards them and screaming. In most of the cases, the victim is silenced and has mental chains that keep them in the exploitation. And this is so important to understand for all people who are working in this field. In Germany, competent criminal officers even say that 90% of the women in prostitution are trafficked and forced into prostitution. The borders are open, they can run away, but they don't, because many of them have established a traumatic bond to their perpetrators. Some of them are sent by their own families, or a person that promises a better future, by a lover boy, or they have experienced violence in their childhood and think that they deserve mistreatment. So I will give an example with the lover boy method. The traffickers are searching especially for vulnerable young women, women who come from a broken home or living in poverty or some other kind of vulnerability. Also adolescents rebelling against their parents are also in a vulnerable phase of life. Then the lover boy trafficker connects with her and gives her positive attention. This is something totally new for her, like not everybody is bad. And the victim will establish a deep emotional relationship to the offender. He will tell her very fast that he loves her and make her believe in a better future with him. After that, the devaluation, threats, and subtle punishment will start. You are not good enough. You can be lucky that I'm with you. I could have many others. Yes, those devaluation becomes I'm worthless. I have to do exactly what he wants from me to keep him, or I deserve mistreatment because I did something wrong. The victim internalizes the offender's view. The self-esteem gets destabilized. Just to clarify one thing, those girls are not naive. Young women are allowed to trust, fall in love, and dream of a better future. This is a perfidious manipulative strategy based on fraud that specifically misuses the vulnerability of young women. It's not a private thing, it's a crime. The victim will be step-by-step isolated and be controlled. So the consequences are, of this first phase, that the victim completely adapts to the needs of the offender. Own feelings and needs are no longer perceived, self-protection and self-care gets lost, the victim develops a negative self-image. Because of the fear losing the bond, the victim starts to deny the negative aspects of the relationship and puts the blame on her if he is unhappy. She starts to feel responsible for his well-being and her attention is totally addressed on his needs. She develops a deep loyalty to him. Once the victim is conditioned and made emotionally addicted to the offender, the second phase will start. Prostitution will become a topic to help him out of debt. Prostitution as a fast solution to help him out of the problems. Once she gets in this milieu, the trap closes and she will get deeply traumatized with each sex buyer. I will explain later why. He will then start showing the real side of himself. He be violent and exploit her. And on top of that, she will think that all of what this happened to her is because of her. Because she thinks that she agreed on everything. She will believe that it was her choice to get into this relationship and into prostitution. The victim is not aware of being a victim of a trafficker and a manipulative strategy. She puts the blame on herself for what happened to her. And this is how it often looks like on the victim's side. Trauma-related responses are in the foreground. The will of these women has been broken. They are in a psychological position where they cannot defend themselves, and perpetrators can do whatever they want with them. They stay in prostitution not because of love anymore, but because of fear and trauma. And this is also the reason why women stay in prostitution. They are too weak to get out on their own. They need help, and also psychological help, to understand what has been done to them and to process it. Helping structures must know this, because women are in a very fragile situation and can very easily be triggered and return into prostitution. They need a safe space. That means people who believe in them, that they will manage the exit, people who are themselves stable and are surrounded that has no contact to the milieu. And I'm saying this because this is in most cases of counseling centers in Germany not given. Just an example, women who are, we have a lot of counseling centers in Germany, women who are still in prostitution and have an advising position. This doesn't work. This will just trigger the women to get back into prostitution. And even if they leave prostitution, parts of oneself can stay loyal to the offender or to the milieu a long time. They have words inside of them who will tell them, it's not his fault, he was in trouble, or he was on my side, he helped me when I was in need. Or also, and I heard this very often, unfortunately also among abolitionist people, that there were also positive sides in the milieu, and it was fast and good money. The survival mechanism to deny the negative things can continue a long time after the exit. From the perspective of health, prostitution cannot be seen as an option in no way. Buying sex is an act of violence against women and should not be allowed. So we do not speak about having a right to prostitute oneself. This is not the point. Our mission is healthcare by doing enlightenment and therapy, because prostitution is serious psychological and physical harm. Why? Now I quoted Michaela Huber, who is the director of the German Society for Trauma and Dissociation. Feelings of fear, disgust, shame, and pain must be switched off in prostitution. This required dissociation either takes place after the first sex buyer and settles deeper and deeper with each sex buyer, or it has already taken place before the start of prostitution. Dozens of studies have shown that the majority of women in prostitution have experienced violence in their childhood. And I refer at this point to several articles I have written here, especially the article Trauma as Precondition of Prostitution. They are already separated from their feelings before they go into prostitution and have not learned to protect themselves, and have also developed no self-esteem. When entering prostitution, many say that it was completely normal for them because they thought not being worthy of something better. Prostitution in this case is a continuation of the violence in the biography of these women. Trafficker, pimps, and brothel operators use the pre-traumatization of their own purpose. And of course, if the German state gets money out of it, he takes a role of a pimp. If you experience a trauma, your body reacts in a way to protect you the best. It activates a physical reaction so that you can fight or run away. So this is the fight and flight reaction. I will not read everything, you know it, your heart will start breathing faster and you will start breathing faster and so on. You know this reaction. But if you cannot escape the situation, if you cannot flee the situation, and this is the case in prostitution, you get away with your mind. It's as if an electrical cable is being cut off, you dissociate. The dissociation is a last survival mechanism that helps us, first of all, not to feel pain, but also to scare away the predator. Because when an animal acts as if it's dead, it has a higher chance to survive because predators don't eat carrion. I'm talking about animals, but our system, inside system, is still working as we were animals. So dissociation is also connected to a sentence. Make yourself dead, be dead. Here just a picture of how it looks like. On the left side, it's a fear reaction, and on the right side, dissociation. But in prostitution, women do not dissociate completely. Only some parts stay highly functional, like they can walk on high heels and smile. They don't look as they were dissociated, but other parts are switched off, like the concentration. Many, after a day won't be able to say how the sex buyers looked like or what they said. The feeling and the smell is dissociation and many other things. Here are the parts of the brain who are involved in trauma. I would like to quickly explain you this because the PTSD is very high in prostitution. So to understand it, I will explain you how the brain is functioning. So here you have the prefrontal cortex that has the capacity to understand and to be in the situation, try to make decisions, remember the past, react, and to calm down. And this is often not really active during dissociation. And your brain, here in black, has the primitive function. It's our autonomic nervous system that will activate our organs to keep us alive. It will make our heartbeat faster, our breathing faster, and so on. The amygdala in red is our alarm system. It has two functions. It is constantly scanning our surrounding. If we are in danger, it produces hormones that put us in a situation that enables us to survive. It's the fight and flight reaction. It's also a memory, as we need to remember what was dangerous for us. And the hippocampus in green is the memory maker. So when information comes in, it will organize it, group it, and store it. So if somebody is under heavy distress, the amygdala fires off and sends messages to our glands in our body that produces hormones to put us in a situation so that we can fight, flight, or freeze. If it were just a phenomenon of dissociation, the damages from prostitution will be limited to that level, but there are also traumatic memories. During dissociation, the body and the cortex are largely anesthetized. One perceives things, but they aren't all remembered in the cortex because the hippocampus is not working properly during trauma. The information and the contextualization of the incident cannot be stored properly. So victims of trauma are not always able to say this happened at that time, at that place. There can be amnesia to holes in the memory. Parts of the experience is recorded in another part of the brain, which is called traumatic memory. This memory doesn't function under the same principle as our cortex. It's like a black box. to which we don't have conscious access and we don't even know that it exists. This memory collects traumatic experience in a disordered way without a sense of space and time. And it isn't semantic, it doesn't have language, it can be brought on at any moment by trigger events that revive the trauma, what was not felt at the moment. A smell, a color, a sound, images, words, phrases, even a thought or a nightmare. At that moment, it triggers an intense anxiety, as if the person was reliving the trauma at that very instant, even if it's past like 20, 40 or 50 years ago. And this is a flashback. A flashback is not only a fear reaction, but also the sentences that were related to the situation can be aroused. Like, you are nothing, you should be dead, you are not worth anything better. So now suddenly, even you are living a stable life and you are triggered, suddenly those sentences can be aroused. I will just give one example. At the moment, I have a woman 50 years old in therapy. Her trauma is about 40 years behind her. She's now newly in love in a positive relationship and has constantly sentences in her head saying that she should kill herself. Why? Because this new relationship is a trigger. And she's afraid to be left alone again. And her deeply marked sentences during the sexual abuse she was victim of in her childhood are now triggered up. And also feelings that were switched off during prostitution can come up, like shame or disgust or other feelings. I will give another example. During prostitution, women usually don't feel ashamed. They don't feel the shame. The shame comes up later. I know one woman who went back and back to prostitution because she couldn't bear the feeling of shame when she exited prostitution. So she went back to dissociate. So recovering is also something very painful because it includes feeling the traumatic experience that was not felt at that moment once again. These reactions are known as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like having a time bomb in the head, and very often it doesn't work with an on and off function. The alarm system can be constantly overactivated. People go sometimes through life with constant fear. They are under constant distress. They often have dissociative symptoms. I heard from one woman who is in the wheelchair after she was in prostitution, not because she has something broken, but because her legs are dissociated. The information that and experience are not narratives. They cannot talk about what happened to them very often because the trauma is not integrated. It continues to impact their life, but it cannot be spoken. There are no files in the brain of those persons where they can say what happened to them. Their memory is fragmented very often. And this is why prostitution leaves very often long-term consequences, and women in prostitution are classified as a high-risk group for PTSD. Here, I have listed 5 studies that show that women in prostitution have more than twice as often PTSD than soldiers coming back from war. And the PTSD is also more complex, as Merle has said it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ingerborg, for such a fascinating presentation. I mean, I think for me, on a personal level, what was striking was the number of similarities with other forms of violence against women, especially domestic violence that came out of it. I recognise the lover boy method, for example, which is a recognised phase within domestic abuse, along with the trauma bonding that was discussed. So I think, you know, you've given us a lot of thought for us that work in the field of violence against women with how we can best provide, you know, some level of support for anyone in prostitution or exiting. So thank you so much for that. So now I want to go into a discussion between three of you, if that's okay. So as I said, so I'd like to start the discussion first by asking Merle and Rebecca about the support that you both received when you were in prostitution and since you've left. So first, Rebecca, could you tell us what support you had? Did you find any services or voluntary organisations, for example, that helped you exit? Obviously, it was some time ago when you were in prostitution, so we know things have changed, although we know exiting services are still very few and far between in the UK. And can you say something about what you think would have actually helped you at that time to exit?
Well, it was a long time ago, but I don't think that things have changed that much, is what I would say to start with. I don't think I had any help, really. I had to escape without help. I eventually received help from a rape place about 2 years after I left, but it wasn't really what I was meant to be talking about. I was meant to be talking about this rape that I'd had, which with nothing to do, which wasn't prostitution. But it ended up with me talking about everything and having a breakdown. But I think that there needs to be much more. People need to be trained into why trauma is so bad with prostituted women, and they need to be trained about specifically to work with prostituted women rather than a general trauma place. I think we can connect a lot with victims of torture and learn a lot from, say, things like the Helen Bamber Foundation, which works with victims of torture. We can learn a lot from that. But I think it's very important to separate out as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. So Merle, could you tell us what professional support was available to you in Sweden? And again, what you perhaps would have liked to have available at the time?
Sure, I'm just gonna mute and then cough. Sorry. When I was 15, I talked to the how do you say, there's a council for, no, sorry, it's a clinic that specializes in youth and helping them with, you know, you go there for testing for STDs, and
Okay.
you can go there also to talk to someone, a therapist, not a psychologist, but a therapist. And that was my first meeting. And I could only talk about the rape because I was a minor. There was this overwhelming threat that if I were to talk about anything else that happened in my life, they would do a social services. How do you say when you
Referral? Yes.
Yeah. So I didn't want to talk about anything else. And then when I finally did, I ended up in the psychiatric ward for youth. And after that, I spent 5 months there. After that, my parents knew. I was let out, and during those 5 months, I didn't receive any treatment. I didn't receive any trauma perceived as a victim. There was also that place where I was called a promiscuous. There was almost a fear of me being this overly sexual teen that was going to come there and sort of destroy the whole unit. I never understood that. I was neither violent or promiscuous. I was a person who'd been raped and locked in and pimped for the last 2 years. But after that, I came into contact with what we call a prostitution unit. We have only 3 of them in Sweden. We have one in Stockholm, one in Gothenburg, and one in Malmö, the 2 biggest cities in Sweden. and they're called, I think they were called the Prostitution Center back then, and now they're called Mika Center. And they have a way of talking that you only go into like therapeutic conversations and you talk about what you experienced and what you're experiencing, and you're trying to probably in a more coaching way talk about your life. The problem is, as far as I see it, as long as you're still in trauma, those kind of talks won't do you any good. And I think that Dr. Krauss mentioned it, that those kind of talks are not of value. They might be like, for me, being there, coming there from a hard month or week or whatever, talking about how bad things that have happened, but nothing changed in my life. I didn't start to feel better going there. And as when it comes to the psychiatric ward, it almost made me worse. It made me more marginalized, because they would say things like, oh, if you talk about this to your to the world, tell the world that you're in prostitution, that you've been prostituted, you can't find work, you can't find friends, you can't find study, like no school will take you in, and you will never be in a relationship. So that was more counterproductive than anything else, I'd say. The problem is when I grew older, I actually stopped in therapy when I was 31, I think, because it didn't do me any good. And the last time I went there, it was trauma-based therapy that was clearly based on some more phobia. I was supposed to talk about one trauma, and then they would ask you, pick the worst thing that you've experienced. And then I had to go through that experience over and over, and I didn't feel that it helped me at all. And I know that people say that some people have said that they've been helped by that, not with my background, obviously, but so I just said stop, and I could almost feel better not being in therapy than when I constantly try to seek help. I would hope that we could sort of gather our resources, or when it comes to the competence surrounding this prostitution and trauma, because I feel that in this field, we have gathered, especially the last 10 or 15 years, we have gathered a lot of useful information on the different continents. Now we just have to sit down and see like how we can perceive and what actually works, not what we do, what works for women or people in prostitution. I would love to see that. And I would also love to see that we get a recognition as victims, because as long as we're not perceived as victims, there's very few women, very few people in prostitution that can go into a therapist and talk. I remember being 15 years old, talking to a therapist about what I've experienced, and she started crying, and that have made forever me not wanting to talk to and open up, because I feel like I'm the perpetrator here. I'm hurting you, talking about my experience. So it's a number of ways we could work with this more efficiently, and that is more beneficial for the people in prostitution, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So even in Sweden, then, there's clearly a lot of room for improvement. So
Yes.
Ingerborg, would you tell us a bit about what structures and services you would like to see put in place?
Well, first of all, after the 20 years having a law that treats prostitution as a job as any other, we have settled up along Germany counseling officers for prostituted women, financed by the state, who are totally useless. I mean, they are offering condoms and coffee, or I don't know what. They are working on keeping the women in prostitution. They have not developed any qualification to help them to exit prostitution. And even they are even offering advice to enter prostitution. They are offering guidance into brothels, you know, like for tourists who want to see the Frankfurt red light district. I mean, it's completely crazy, and they get millions of euros every year from our state. So now during the Corona crisis, more women express their wish to exit prostitution. And now, you know, they were not able to give them any help. I know this from my hometown, you know, where they put the women, because they didn't have, I mean, here in my hometown, they didn't have any shelter. You know, there is one counseling office here, and who is working for 8 years. They have opened in 2013, and they haven't thought once that it would be good to have a shelter for women. So they never had the idea that, you know, they are in danger, that they have to leave the milieu in 8 years. So you know where they put the women who wanted to exit? In the brothels. They asked the brothels operator to give them, because they had to close down. So you can imagine what happened. You know, they got a very big bill after that. And also, you know, with this law, I mean, the people who introduced this law, they wanted to strengthen the women, but now after 20 years, we see that they don't even have a social security. So I don't know, you know, we don't exactly know the numbers of how many women are in prostitution in Germany. Some say 200,000, others say 1 million. I personally think we have 400,000 women in prostitution in Germany. And out of, let's say, 400,000, only 76 have registered as independent entrepreneurs. So they officially have a social security. So 76 from 400,000, it's not much, you know. So most of the women, you know, they cannot go to a doctor, even if they have a flu, to get health support. So it's a disaster, it's a catastrophe. And here I'm talking about medical help. I'm not even talking about, you know, psychological support. So we have to set up, first of all, we need a Nordic model. And with that, we have to set up a complete new helping structure in Germany. You know what they're doing? Here in my hometown, they collaborate with the brothel operators. They have a couple of, in January, they have done, how do you say, a contract with the brothel operators to have better conditions with the women. But these are criminals, you know. Because I think, you know, they're the goodies, you know, they will help the women. They haven't understood the system. They are integrated in the exploitation structure. They keep the women even deeper in this exploitation and put the blame on her, on them. Yeah. I'm sorry, but it's a real disaster.
So my next question then is to Merle and Rebecca again. So in what ways is the trauma that you experienced in prostitution still affecting you today, you know, in yourself and in your lives? And maybe it'd be useful here to understand how long ago it was that you managed to exit. Merle, do you want to go first?
Yes, I can go first. Thank you. Wow, it's a hard question because I was in prostitution for so long. I exited 2015, so it's 6 years ago. First, it was the, you know, nightmares, but not as heavy, but it was a constant feeling of being afraid. I lived in a fear. And many of times I had, you know, the fear was real. So I didn't see that I actually was in fear, even when I wasn't with a punter. And then came something that I don't have as much of now, thank God. Time freezing, where I could just sit or stand and time would flew by, like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And I just like woke up. Self-hatred, low self-esteem, low sense of self, dissociation, not being able to breastfeed my first child without feeling sexualized, feeling, you know, physically ill, having this small child by my breast who didn't want anything else but to feed on me. But my breast have never been used as anything else than pleasure for men, and I couldn't control them. And now I couldn't control this little one. I've had a couple of half-hearted suicide attempts when I was younger. Nowadays, I've chosen to, like, you know what, no more suicide attempts, choose life, just try and stick it out and hope for the best, hope that things will become better. But it's flashbacks, it's smell, it's hearing, it's it's not being able to find words. Like, okay, English is not my native language, but in Swedish, not being able to find words, having days where I'm almost, this is a bad day I'm describing now, of course, but having days where I can't, you know, my heart is beating, I can't really breathe the way I want it to, and I almost saliva coming out of my mouth, like my brain is numb. It's just completely shut off. There's no words, there's nothing there. And then I can like try and snap out of it, but it's hard. So that's a really bad day. But I you know, going into McDonald's with my kids and having all the lights and all the sounds, and, you know, you start sweating, and, you know, you just want to get out of there. So knowing that I probably never will be okay, like it saddened me a lot at first, but knowing that I can find ways of being more okay, like trying to make myself go in there and trying to find like the tools to feel better in different situations. And for me, a great big positive thing has been, I don't have to be sexual. I don't put that pressure on me. I don't have to be sexual with either women or men. I can be happy and asexual. Like, not probably the proper asexual, but, you know, not feeling I have to do something with anyone else. So that's what I've done to feel better, and, you know, constantly trying to find tools to feel better. So I feel a lot better today than I did, you know, a couple of years back.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's thank you so much. So Rebecca, what about you? Rebecca's pressed the wrong button there. There she is.
Sorry for that. Well, yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to talk about trauma and sort of say about it in a journey type of thing. I mean, I've been abused before I was in prostitution, so it's all interconnected. But I do think that being detached is a major thing for me. I find it very easy to be detached from everything, really, and I tend to bring that out with quite sort of sarcastic humor, really, is the way I cope with it. And I think that as I said in my talk, that having trauma is like having a shadow in your life, that even when the sun is out, it's still inside of you. It's still, you know, I mean, I remember like once being afraid to be happy, you know, because being happy was really triggering for me, because it made me feel like I don't deserve this. I don't, you know, I should be dead, not be happy. I was I've learned ways of feeling things, of learning to feel has been a big thing for me, and learning to accept that my memory is fragmented and that I may never remember certain things was a really big barrier for me, because I'm quite an analytical type person, and I tend to like things to be, I like to understand things. I tend to be go into depth about a lot of stuff, and to not remember my own life has been very hard for me. But I've learned to accept that. I mean, there's a saying that they say that your brain only remembers until you believe yourself. And I think that's a very important factor for me, that most of my life I was told that I lied about everything that happened to me, and that basically it wasn't true. And to know that I am speaking truth, even if the truth is very fragmented and very disorganized, is what matters to me. And to know that it connects with other women, that they go, especially with other exited women. But I also think the thing that when I was in prostitution, I was completely cut off from my body. And now I have lots of physical after effects because of that. And I have a lot of illnesses because I had a lot of things that affected my body, but I didn't respond to it at the time. I mean, for instance, I have major breathing problems, and I also choke a lot. And I know that's connected to prostitution, even if I don't have the words to say why it's connected to prostitution. And I also find that I would rather be celibate now because I feel that I'm afraid of of the amount of violence that was put into me, that makes me either want to hurt someone or makes me want to hurt myself. So it's kind of, I'm afraid of that, even if it never happens. I mean, it's like I used to try and commit suicide on quite a regular basis, and now I haven't done that for over 10 years. But my brother-in-law committed suicide 3 years ago. And I was so proud of myself, because when he died, I was thinking, well, you know, he died immediately. That would have been so easy for me. And I just thought, no, there's too much I want to live for. And I have people in my life now, and I have nature in my life. And I think that having suicidal feelings is part of the trauma, and you learn to live with it, but it doesn't just go just because you haven't cut yourself or haven't taken pills. It's still there, but it's just something that most exited women don't talk about, because other people find they always have to protect other people when they talk about it. And I think that we should be more open about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Rebecca. Thank you so much. So we've heard some really graphic and profound descriptions, both from Early and Rebecca there, Ingerborg. So what do you think about the long-term consequences that you see in prostitution? So can you tell us a bit about that?
You know, there are things that help processing a trauma and integrating a trauma into the life of the victim. For example, if the trauma is recognized by the state and the society, and this is, for example, in Germany not given. And now if a soldier comes back from war, the first thing is, oh, he must be traumatized, it was so bad. And he's a hero. When a woman exits prostitution, first of all, nobody is asking, well, she must be traumatized because it's seen as a job as any other. It's a re-traumatization women experience once they exit prostitution, because they don't they don't get recognition of what happened to them. So this is a big obstacle for processing trauma. The other thing, and I showed it in this picture, you know, with the traumatized me, with the many things I went over very quickly. But when you exit prostitution, you are alone, because the system of prostitution isolates you. It's like this, it works like this. And the time you have spent in prostitution, it's stolen time. You know, I mean, I haven't met somebody who said, yeah, well, you know, I was in prostitution and I did my PhD by side. I never met somebody like this. I met women, you know, who entered prostitution during university, and then they quit everything. So you are alone, and then you go to those great counseling centers in Germany, you know, who tell you, well, first of all, the probability is very high that a woman who is advising you is still in prostitution. You know, she will, in our cases like this, that, you know, she will be advised to go to a massage salon or to become a domina, you know, just to change the direction of prostitution. Or she will be just said, well, just change her job, you know, go to the job office and apply for another job. But this is not helping. So she stays alone, and all this makes it very difficult to overcome trauma. And of course, everything depends how long you were in prostitution and the age you exit prostitution. You know, when you quit everything, you haven't learned, you quit your school, you haven't learned job, and you exit prostitution when you are 40 or 50. You know, it will be more difficult to overcome it. If you are younger and you can see a goal, you can work on, the chances are higher to overcome it. When, you know, when you have a diploma in your hand after a couple of years, you can become, set up a life individually and become independent. It will also help, but this is not always given.
Thank you. So you've just talked briefly about PTSD, and we've just had a number of questions from the audience, all asking very similar questions. So it is, thank you for all the information on PTSD that you've already told us. Can you share more on the difference between soldiers who've been in war zones suffering PTSD and women in prostitution, and any other comparisons that you've done? Why is there the difference between soldiers and women in prostitution?
Perhaps I can respond to that question. I always, you know, it's not about like saying one is worse than the other and the soldiers are, you know, they're less traumatized. It's not about this, you know. I respect every trauma has to be, you know, treated the same way. So I'm not saying, you know, the soldiers are less traumatized, but we have to understand the complexity of the trauma you get in prostitution. And it's different, you know, in prostitution. A soldier, you know, has a machine gun in the hand. He knows why he's going into war, you know, to protect democracy, to liberate people, I don't know. And he has a protection, you know, his body is protected. In prostitution, the women are naked. They have no protection. They're ashamed 20 times a day, all the time. And it's the worst type of trauma. You know, it's the individual close, and you cannot escape. You know, you have to escape with your mind all the time. So it makes the thing very complex. I call it complex because they have to learn all the time. You know, they have to set up survival mechanism to cope with it, and this survival, as I said, is the dissociation, and the dissociation is not a thing that you can turn on and off. As Rebecca said, you know, you switch yourself off with your mind when you are triggered. I don't know if I was able to explain the difference.
Thank you. We've had another interesting question from one of the audience. Oh, sorry, Merle, did you want to respond to that?
Well, yes, I'd like to maybe add something to Dr. Krauss. I'm not a doctor in this, but in my experience, when it comes to people in trauma in prostitution, you want people to be traumatized in prostitution. Rape is one of the greatest tools that they have. Coming into a brothel, I was in brothel when I was 19, you were raped. Coming into Stockholm, being locked into an apartment, being sold when I was 15, you were raped. And they use that as a tool to break you down and to make you more complicit. And you're a greater person in prostitution when you're in full-on trauma. As of looking at soldiers, we can all agree that we don't want traumatized soldiers, and a traumatized soldier is not as it's 100%. We look at that soldier to be in need of care, and you don't do that in prostitution. With people in prostitution. I think that for me, as a person that doesn't know anything like that, but that is for me the biggest difference between how it's viewed.
Thank you, Melanie. Yeah, thank you. So as I said, we just had another really interesting question put to us by a member of the audience, and I'm guessing it's a she. She says, I'm from Save Our Eyes campaign in Leeds. I'm interested in Dr. Krauss's comment about women being too weak to get out on their own. We believe this is true because women spend so long in street prostitution. Yet our experts claim that the women have to really want to exit in order to access any exiting services. So we feel that the service here should involve push and pull. By example, reducing the punter numbers and reducing the income and making it easier for any women to exit prostitution. So the pro-sex work charity that advises Leeds City Council is opposed to targeting any punters. So what are your thoughts on this? So I don't know who wants to answer that first. Dr. Krauss, would you like to say something? You're on mute. See that? You're on mute, Dr. Krauss. Thank you.
You know, I was once in France. I was watching how they work with the women, and it's a long process to motivate them, to motivate, their motivation to exit prostitution. But I like the way they're doing it. They go into the streets with nothing. They don't come with condoms or a cup of coffee, or they come with nothing because don't believe in positive relationships anymore. So if you come with a gift, it's already, you know, it's not the same level, you know, again. So what they're doing, they try to set up a relationship with those women, but with nothing. They just come, you know, to show them we are here, but to help you to exit. Mm. And this is very clear from the beginning on. We are not here, you know, to help you to stay in prostitution and to help you to make prostitution, yeah, I don't know, a little bit easier. And I like this way because it starts from the beginning on setting up a relationship. This is so difficult for the women because their prostitution has nothing to do with relationships. It breaks, they have no trust anymore in anything because they are just used as an object for years, you know. So when somebody comes and don't have a look at them, you know, as an object or but as a person, you know, this can help, you know, to motivate them to exit. I like this, yeah, and I would motivate every, you know, counseling office to work like this. Thank you.
Really?
Yes, we also looked at this question. What's hard is I've met this so much before that you need to be motivated. I've myself said at a certain extent you need to be motivated, but you can't tell a person to exit when there's nothing to exit to. And there we have the problem with just having therapeutic talks, is that if my financial situation is keeping me in prostitution, and my health, my mental health will be secondary to me, because I need a roof over my head, we need food, we need to be able to pay our bills. So I'm not going to be able to take that help from you, even though you're a very good therapist. We can sit there and talk for weeks, for months, for years. But if my financial situation aren't getting any better, that's not going to give me anything. So, and the problem is when we're looking at working with people in prostitution, often we're looking at as almost comparing it to a lighter version, I say lighter version of substance abuse, meaning that the person in the substance abuse have a job, have everything else stable in their lives. That's not what's happening when you're generally in prostitution. A lot of things that comes with prostitution is debt. You're supposed to live as your fellow 25, 30-year-olds. And so you maybe have a car debt, you maybe have bad credit. And on top of that, when you have other debts that has gone way further. So we must be looking at debt. I don't know what you call it in England, but I think we say in Swedish is skuldsanering, which is a kind of when you collect the debt and you give like a reasonable amount to pay each month. Because it's not about having economic, how do you say, more than anyone else, but you have to have that, you know, economical safety net of not being ending up on the streets, because in the nature of being in prostitution is that you do that. I think, if I look at myself, to the last hope I had in my prostitution was, well, at least I can pay my bills. Well, at least I can feed my child. So I will continue as long as I can't see another option to do that. So we're talking, you know, forms of studying, like helping them to get into schools and all that stuff. So it's so many islands that needs to be touched when working in getting people out of prostitution. And I see that as a society, we can offer that help, but not as long as we have that sort of tunnel vision on how to receive help in the form of exiting. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Rebecca, would you like to say anything?
Well, I feel that to understand exiting, we need to understand that the sex trade has broken these people as much as they possibly can. And often a lot of people that enter the sex trade have been broken by other stuff as well. So to say that they should be motivated is to me, it's almost like that's not the most important thing, because I don't think you can be motivated when you're broken. It's very hard if you've come from a background where you're taught to hate yourself, you're taught that you are nothing. I mean, the sex trade teaches you that you're not even human. And so it's hard to think about the future if you don't believe that you exist as a human being. So the idea that they can only exit if they're motivated is kind of sick, actually, in my opinion. It's a very judgmental way of viewing prostitution. And also it's not talking about the men that are buying these women. The men that are buying are the people that we can deal with. We can actually say to them, you are choosing to do something that is so wrong and is destroying people's lives, and in the long run is destroying the society that you live in. We need to give you full consequences for your actions. Because I think with me as a prostitute, if I had seen the men being punished, that would have given me hope. That would have given me the idea that actually people on the outside of the sex trade actually do care, do actually think that we matter. That, you know, I mean, if men that buy sex went to jail or were fined a lot of money, not a token amount, but a lot of money, you know, 1/10, say, of their wages, then I think it would give prostitute women the idea that there are people that actually want to hear us and want to see us. I think as long as punters and sex trade profiteers are getting away with it scot-free, we can't talk about saying to prostituted women, oh, you should be motivated to get out. We can't talk that way because it's hypocritical.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for those answers, and I hope that the Leeds campaign, you know, can take away some really good information from what three of you have just said. So thank you. So as I said in the introduction, we're campaigning for the Nordic model approach here in the UK, and it's painful for us to hear that even in Sweden, the services to provided for women in prostitution actually fall so far short of what is still really needed. So we know, Merle, that you and lots of other women are campaigning for improvements, but could you talk a bit about the other aspects of the Nordic model over in Sweden? So over in the UK, we hear several claims over and over again that, one, the policing of the Nordic model is brutal and actually puts the women at risk, that women are routinely evicted from their homes for selling sex, and that children are routinely taken into care because the mothers are selling sex. So, Merle, is any of that true? Can you talk a bit about those claims that we hear?
The thing we really like when you have PTSD is when someone says a number of things and expects you to remember everything.
Sorry,
I'm sorry.
No, I got to the first one. So the first one obviously is that the policing of the Nordic model in Sweden is brutal and puts the women at risk. Is that true?
No, that's not true. No. The thing is, I'm trying to say when it comes to the Nordic model, without letting people down, I feel that people are being like, oh, the Nordic model must work. It's a model. Yeah. It's about a model, and it's its first in Sweden that we've had, and it was written by wonderful experts, and we had a trial run with it for like, I think it was 10 years before they made the first evaluation, or 5 years maybe. The thing is it's not bad. It's not endangering people in prostitution. It's supposed to help us. But as I've said, the problem was that we made one side work really well as it could. Yeah. With policing the punters, and they've been fined up until now. Now we have gone to the next level, which is they will now take away the fine and go straight to jail if you are still buying people in prostitution. But of course we needed to make it work better. Like we're not a perfect society. Neither are yours, neither are any society. But we have the model. We have something really strong to work with. So you should always campaign for the Nordic model, but you can't just campaign for the Nordic model. You have to also campaign to get all those facilities, all those places of trauma therapy, and how do you, when you look at housing for people in prostitution, other securities for women at risk or women who have exited. So it's not just one thing, and I know that you all know this. I'm speaking to the choir, but don't think that I'm criticizing that we have a Nordic model, because I never done that. It's just that it needs improvements.
So the second part that we hear all the time is that women are routinely evicted from their homes for selling sex. So is there any truth in that?
No, there's no truth in that. What people have probably found is that in our housing laws, when you rent a house, there is one of them states that if you're involved in prostitution, you might get evicted. But the thing is, from my knowledge, no prostitute has ever been evicted for being a prostitute in their own home. What they've done is that they've gone in and broken up home brothels. And then they've taken away the contract from the person that has rented out to these traffickers. Then they have used that clause, but it's widely known that it's never been used like that.
Right. So the last part of the question then is that children are routinely taken into care because their mothers are selling sex.
No, that's not true. But we have strong child protective laws. Yeah. We have, and we're proud of that. But I have never heard of a single case where the prostitution has been the one single thing that's made the person being the child being taken into care. First of all, it's really hard. Maybe in my opinion, sometimes too hard to take a child into care in Sweden. But we're really for the strength of the parents, like the parental rights. But if we put it this way, if we were to have had one of those cases, and if I was that mother, let's say, and I was in prostitution, I was in abuse, like, how do you say, drug abuse, is it my right to care for my child when I can't care for myself at that point? So when we start spreading all these like rumors, we have to also protect the children in this. I'd want you to take my children away from me if I could not care for them. But I've actually had one very, I searched because one of the biggest things for me right now is that with PTSD and with trauma, you're exhausted all the time. I feel like I'm exhausted. I can't be, and I've tried to search for help a couple of times for that. And one time a lady told me that maybe we should take your kids. She wouldn't have had no right to do that whatsoever, even if she tried, like nothing. Yeah. So no.
Thank you. Well, that's really encouraging to hear, you say that, so we can respond to anybody who sort of says that to us. So we're running out of time now. So I think that it's really important that we actually end on a note of hope. So I know, for example, from my own personal experiences of trauma, that it changes you. You will never be the person that you would have been if that hadn't happened to you, but recovery is possible and you can go on to have a good life. It's a different life than possibly what you would have had without the trauma and all the battles, but it can actually be richer than you ever could have imagined. So I would just like to ask the panelists one final question each. What advice would you give to those listening whose lives have been seriously impacted by trauma, who may be struggling right now? So Dr. Krauss, would you like to go first?
Now, when you look at people who really changed big things in the world, they had a trauma behind them. Yeah.
Rebecca, you are muted.
You're mute, Ali. Ali?
I'm the one on mute. Thank you. So would you like to go next, Rebecca?
Oh, right. Well, I think it's about, to me, one of the things is about getting back the things that you care about a lot. I mean, with me, I went back to loving music and loving the arts and loving nature, and also getting some sort of, if you have a good family, then be connected to them. I connected back with my sister and became an aunt, and now a great aunt, I also think it's about accepting trauma, accepting it as a shadow and not being afraid of it. Because part of the worst thing about trauma is that you're fighting it all the time. We fight it a lot, and we tell it to go away, or we say like, and it's almost like it's not going to go away just because we shout at it or because we don't like it. And it's almost like learn to live with it, and to almost like, I would say, I learned to be friends with my trauma and not to be afraid of it, and to say, you might be actually teaching me something. You might be actually giving me a message that I need to hear. Or you might be saying something that is very painful and very confusing, but I just have to let it flow over me like a wave, I mean, I used to do body surfing, because I didn't do proper surfing because I was a wimp. But I just and I was afraid of water, but I still did it, even though I was afraid of water. And it's almost like, to me, it's like facing up to your trauma is often the best way of dealing with it. It's like, face it. I think that I did something that I don't recommend, but I faced my trauma head on because it was killing me. And I was thinking, like, this is going to kill me if I just keep ignoring it the way I am and keep running away from it. And in the end, I went, right, I'm going to stare you straight down the eye. I'm going to look at you. And I did that for a few years, and it nearly did destroy me, but it was worth it, because I came out a person that I wasn't before, a person who had the idea of empathy and feelings, and also was not afraid to ask for help. Because part of trauma also makes you think, oh, I can just do this by myself. I don't need help. I can pull myself out of this, or other people have it a lot worse, so why am I complaining? It's very hard to know that trauma is going to be part of you, but don't be afraid of it, because it's actually, in a funny way, trauma is actually on your side. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you. Millie, would you like to say anything to finish?
Yes, I would like to say thank you for having me, but also that a lot of us dealing with trauma has suffered from survivor's guilt. So we will dedicate our lives to the cause, to help others. And I've done that too. And we live in, if I live in Sweden, wherever you live, there is a shortage of helping women with trauma. And so my biggest thing is like, allow yourself to take care of yourself and to take a break. And if you can't look at yourself with that love in your eyes, then find someone who will, not necessarily a boyfriend or a partner, and look at yourself through their eyes, bad days. And also, this is something that's really warm to my heart. If you're like me and you can't stand the touch of a man, but you still want to be a parent, there are ways out there to become a parent nowadays without doing that. I went to coparents.com with my youngest one, and I got inseminated, and I'm a mom now. I rely on no man for that. I just wanted to put that out there, that, you know, we all know that we've lived our lives, not so much as a society which might would have wanted us, but we're here, and we should be allowed to keep living our lives, not a half life. Having trauma is not living a half life if you keep working on yourself, and try, you know, listening to tips and try and keep that love in there.
Thank you so much. So we're practically out of time now. So I want to thank our incredible panelists for giving their time and sharing their knowledge and experience so brilliantly. So thank you so much to all of you. So before we close, I just want to mention some suggestions for practical actions that you can take away with you. So the most important thing that anybody can do is raise awareness about the Nordic model and the harms of prostitution. So we have loads of information on our website, which is nordicmodelnow.org. So do please read it, and obviously share any information on there. You can watch our YouTube videos and listen to our podcasts, and please follow us on social media as well. So we're on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at Nordic Model Now. So please follow us and like us and share our stuff. So thank you everyone for coming today, and have a really good rest of the day.